bill that would require voters to show a photo ID.
Clerk, ring the bell. It's a record vote.
It's all about integrity.
It's a record vote.
But the integrity of one person, one vote doesn't apply at the legislature. We found many lawmakers vote more than once. Take a look. Riddle votes, turns around, votes again for State Rep Keppel. Rewind. And watch the men on the screen. Elkins goes to vote for Merritt, but Hancock is faster. Elkins heads back to his desk, but before he can vote, Joe Crabb turns around and beats him to it.
Holy shit! They are literally competing to press other people's voting buttons. And remember, this is Texas, which has the strictest ID laws in the country. And apparently this process is called ghost voting. And it happens in state legislatures all over the country. And sometimes they involve literal ghost votes. One lawmaker in Texas died and was recorded voting 3 times later that day. Which is clearly ridiculous. A real ghost wouldn't waste its time voting on bills. It would be out.
Okay. Welcome to, let's see if I can go to the next slide. Do I have to exit out of here? There we go. Hi, welcome. My name is Paul Roesler. I teach political science here at St. Charles Community College. And today we're going to talk about the 2020 election and the myth of voter fraud. As I was saying earlier, I often have my students, when they come in for the first few minutes, I have my students watch a silly comedy clip on a topic that's relevant. And so I thought John Oliver did a great job explaining the problems with the myth, or how much the voter fraud was a myth. But we'll talk more about that in this lecture. But first, I want to talk about Harold Laswell. Harold Laswell is he coined one of the most famous definitions of politics. Politics is who gets what, when, and how. And those who've had my American government class are probably sick of Harold Laswell because we talk about him ad nauseum. The who gets what is basically what we're talking about in terms of, are we going to have a tax cut? Are we going to have more money for, we talked about earlier, more money for Medicaid expansion, more money for example, Democrats are proposing in the Senate to expand Medicare to cover dental and vision and other kinds of things like that. That's kind of the what we want to do. Political scientists are often really interested in the how, the rules of the game. And that's because the how you do something can affect the outcome. The rules of the game can affect the outcome. For example, and I talk about this in American government and also comparative politics, why third parties don't win in American politics and why they do win in other countries, such as, for example, Germany. One of the most powerful parties in Germany today is the Green Party, which is we think of a very minor third party in this country. It's only famous for helping Donald Trump win the presidency in 2016 by taking votes away from Hillary Clinton, and doing the same thing to George W. Bush by taking votes away from Al Gore. But that's all the Green Party is famous for in this country. In Germany, it has a reasonably good chance of winning in Germany's elections, and that's because of the rules of the game. So how you write the rules can affect the outcome. This lecture is going to focus on the how. So how the rules impact reality. Briefly, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just so we're all aware of how the Electoral College works. Anyone know how many votes roughly Joe Biden beat Donald Trump in 2020 nationwide? 7 million. About 7 million. About 7 million, give or take 10 or 20,000, I think. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. How many votes, who won the popular vote in 2016? Hillary Clinton. Anyone know how much she won that vote in? About 3 million votes. 3 million votes. So was she president? No, we don't. The rules matter. And in this case, the popular vote nationwide doesn't matter. The way it does matter within states. And so what we have in our system is we have a popular vote set up where that states, if you, for the most part, there are a couple exceptions. If you take my American government class, we talk about those exceptions. But for the most part, if you win the vote, if you win the popular vote in a state, you get all those states' electors. Now, back in the back in the day when the Constitution was first written, the ideas were that these electors would get together and among them decide who the best president would be. It doesn't work that way anymore. The way the Electoral College works is basically a rubber stamp. So who won Missouri in 2020 or 2016? Trump won Missouri. So how did the Missouri's 10 electors vote in both 2016 and 2020? Any guesses? They went for Trump. Basically, since Trump won Missouri, we have a competing ballot. So we have, if Biden had won Missouri in 2020, then there would have been 10 Democrats would have won. When you voted for Biden or you voted for Trump, you didn't actually vote for Biden or Trump. You voted for 10 Democrats or 10 Republicans. And since Trump won, 10 Republicans were elected to the Electoral College who were going to vote for Trump. That's not how the framers intended it. We talk more about this in American government, but the gist of it is it's a winner-take-all system at the state level. So it matters who wins a state. So was it close in Missouri? Was it a squeaker? Were we up till a week later to find out who actually finally won Missouri? No, I see some. No, right. It wasn't close. I should have looked it up. I want to say, and just off the top of my head, I could be wrong on this. It was about a 15-point margin? Maybe that's too much. But you're nodding 15 points sounds right to you? I thought it was. I mean, it was a blowout. Okay, it wasn't close. I should have looked it up, but I didn't think about it. But it was a blowout in Missouri. So what's wrong with that? Well, first of all, it's also, I didn't have it up there, it's undemocratic. The fact that Hillary got 3 million more votes in 2016 and lost the election, to me is just like, what? Democracy literally means the people rule. The people voted for Hillary in 2016, it didn't matter. But the other problem is, it also affects the campaign style. So knowing that there is a snowball's chance of hell Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton's going to win in Missouri, how much campaigning did Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton do in Missouri? None. Why not? Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's a winner take all. If Trump wins Missouri by a single vote, he gets all 10. Okay? It isn't, if it's 50-50, Biden gets 50. No. It's a winner take all system. So basically, where are you going to campaign if you're a politician? States that are swing states, that it could go either way. Florida, although Florida is becoming more and more a Republican state, it's still close-ish. I think Trump only won it by like 3 points, so it's still relatively close. But yeah, you're going to campaign these swing states. So that's one of my biggest beefs with the Electoral College. So that's how our system works. It's a winner-take-all, state-by-state system. And so because of that, what you've seen is even though Biden crushed nationally, huge margin of victory, 7 million votes, you have some states where the elections were very, very close. And that's what a lot of the election fraud issues were. So here's 2016. Trump won. In some ways, it was a blowout. He won 306 to 232. Pretty significant margin of victory. But if you notice that he only won some of these swing states by 10 or 20,000 votes, it looks like a smaller victory. But it sounds pretty good, 306 by 232. Biden flipped the script a little bit on that, and he won a lot of these swing states by fairly small margins. Bigger than Trump. Trump would win a state by 10,000, Biden won it by 40,000. But relatively small. We're talking about 40,000 votes out of 4 million cast. So we're talking about a very 1%, 2%, 0.5%. We're talking about very small margins. So here's Biden, Arizona, Georgia, all very close elections in those states. Even though the margin nationwide was huge, those victories were very small. So what Trump has claimed, and a lot of his supporters have claimed, is that in those swing states where there were only 20, 30, 40, 80,000 votes separating them, that there was fraud going on in those states. Does that make sense? So that's why, well, who cares if there's a few thousand votes that are alleged fraud if Biden won by 7 million, because we don't have a national election, we have a state-by-state election. So that's what's going on here.
But that hasn't stopped the president from repeating his fact-free claims and advocating for voter ID laws like he did last week in Florida.
You know, if you go out and you want to buy groceries, you need a picture on a card. You need ID.
So, well, I don't know, do you guys ever go grocery shopping? How many of you have to have an ID to buy bread and milk? I see some no. Yeah, you know, I don't know what Trump was thinking, but no, you don't have to have an ID to buy groceries. This is actually after the 2018 election, when Democrats did well in the midterms. So Trump was complaining about the allegations of fraud, and this is why this push. And in-person voting fraud is very uncommon. Why? How many of you voted in the last election? Excellent. All right. Okay. So you just logged in and voted from home your jammies, and you were done in 2 seconds, right? No. Okay. So it takes some effort to vote. Okay. Typically, how long do you have to wait in line to vote? Typically, someone over here raise your hand. About an hour. Okay. So that's actually longer than of course, I cheated. I went early. St. Charles County allows you to vote. Actually, it really was cool. Allows you to vote early. We actually thought we were going to be out of town for Election Day. So, because again, it's illegal to vote early in St. Charles County without an excuse. And so we thought we were going to be out of town, so I voted early. It took me all of 15 minutes to vote. Well, plus drive time, maybe half an hour to vote early. It was I was thrilled. But yeah, normally it takes 45 minutes to an hour to vote. It's a prison sentence. You're looking at thousands of dollars of fine. And again, you're talking about swing states. I think it's on the next slide, where you need 20, 30, 50, 80, 100,000 votes to make a difference. How often do you think people would go vote and then put on a wig or put on a trench coat and go back and vote, pretend you're somebody else? How often does that happen? Not very. I think there are a few very rare circumstances where you have illegal voting, but it's almost never voter impersonation. There was a case where a woman in, I want to say Kentucky, but I could be wrong on the state. She went and tried to vote. Her mom, actually, she got out of prison. She was on parole, and her mom, it was a 2018 election. Her mom convinced her, I'm going to go vote. You should go with me to vote. You're out of prison now. You should go vote. So she said, okay. So she went with her mom to vote. Her mom got in, no problem to vote, but her name wasn't on the rolls. So what you can do, if your name is not on the roll, you can actually have a cast of what's called a provisional ballot. And so she did that. She cast a provisional ballot. I should be on the roll. I was registered here. I should be able to vote. And she cast a provisional ballot. Well, they looked her up, and they realized, and again, I've forgotten what state. I'm blaming Kentucky, but I could be wrong on the state. Probably, I should blame Florida. I always blame everything on Florida and Texas, so I'll blame Florida. And so so Florida has a law, so if you're on parole, you are not eligible to vote. So she was on parole. She hadn't finished her service. She was on parole for her service. And so she was not allowed to vote. So they didn't cast her vote. They didn't count her vote. Anyone know what happened to her instead? 5 years in prison for illegally trying to vote. Her vote wasn't even counted. Now technically, that counts as voter fraud. Did she know she was not allowed to vote? No. She thought because she was out of prison, her mom convinced her to vote, she was going to do a vote. Her vote was never counted, but that counts as voter fraud. But that wasn't a photo ID wouldn't matter. She probably had a photo ID, who knows? But it didn't matter. So in-person voter fraud just never happened. So why do Republicans want In-person photo ID. If in-person voter fraud is almost non-existent. This might help you explain that. Which groups are less likely to have a photo ID? Which groups are most likely to vote Democratic? Minorities. So, if you are, and by the way, which group typically overwhelmingly votes Republican? White people. So, only 8% of whites don't have an ID. So if you require photo ID, who are you going to disenfranchise? Minorities, who overwhelmingly vote Democratic. So remember I said rules affect the outcome, who gets what, when, and how? There is no evidence of any meaningful in-person voter impersonation. Again, it happens. There are a few cases, just like there's a few cases of a stabby crab, right? We saw from the John Oliver clip. Yeah, occasionally a crab gets a hold of a knife and waves it around. Okay, it's not like it doesn't happen, but it certainly is not going to affect anything. So we're looking at maybe 2 or 3, half a dozen cases. What was the closest election in what state had the closest election in 2020? Or at least one of the two. Well, there were 2 I'm thinking of that were almost identically close. Arizona was one. Anyone know the other one? Michigan. Now, Michigan was kind of a blow. I mean, it was close, but it was. I don't think so. That's not the one I was thinking of. Do you know? Pennsylvania was sort of close. It was close-ish, but it was Georgia. Arizona and Georgia were both squeakers. I mean, Michigan, I can't remember the exact total. I want to say it was like 100,000 votes. Not that close. Maybe it was more than that, 140,000 votes. But it wasn't that close. But Arizona and Georgia were like, anyone know what the margin was in those states? 10 votes, 100 votes, 1,000 votes, 10,000? It was about 11,000, 12,000. So if you had 3 or 4 people put on a dress, put on a wig, try to do that, not that is that going to affect your election? No. How many would do that knowing it's not going to affect the election, knowing you can go to prison for that? How many would actually do that? Not many people would do that, and it doesn't happen. So the reason why we have photo ID has nothing to do with stopping election fraud, because there is in-person voter impersonation is essentially non-existent. Again, you occasionally get like a stabby crab, it happens, okay? But you're not going to create, as John Oliver said, you're not going to burn every spindle in the nation just because you have a prophecy, okay? That's an overreaction. This is then Secretary of State, he's now the governor, explaining his concern. And one of the issues with elections is, generally speaking, Democrats tend to do better when turnout is higher. And so when turnout is higher, Republicans start getting nervous. Oops, didn't play. Oh, maybe I have to actually click on it. It's a little hard to hear, so hopefully you can hear it.
As worried as we were going into the start early voting with the literally tens of millions of dollars that they are putting behind to get out the vote efforts for their base, a lot of that with absentee ballot requests. They have just an unprecedented number of that, which is something that continues to concern us, especially if everybody uses and exercises their right to vote.
So he's terrified that if everybody actually might exercise their right to vote. Okay, why? Republican for governor, he won, was a squeaker against Stacey Abrams. He's now the governor of Georgia. But that was what they were worried about, is too many people voting, not illegally voting, but legally voting. Now, I do want to qualify that I am concerned with making it too easy to vote. There is a reason we should have voting rules. We definitely need voting rules. Okay. For example, electronic voting would be a disaster. I know for a long time there was a push, we should do this, we should do this. Okay, I'm trusting that the 2020 election convinced people that would be a terrible idea. Okay, I think enough people now understand why that's a terrible idea. But for many, many years there was a push, why don't we just vote from the comfort of our homes? What's wrong with that? Just email all our votes in. Security, or people, or as you say, vote for somebody else. Okay, yeah, security, right? Because no foreign country would ever hack our election machines, right? Okay, right. So there were, for example, there were allegations of voting irregularities in Georgia. So what did Georgia do to verify that there was no shenanigans in the Georgia 2020 election? They did 3 recounts. Okay, the first recount was just running through running the ballots through the machine. I forgot what the second recount was. I forgot. The third one though was a manual recount of every single ballot, hand recount every single ballot. So can you prove? So there are allegations, for example, that we'll get to that some Italian company was switching votes on a computer. Well, do we know for a fact that's a lie? In Georgia especially? Yeah, because they did a manual recount of every single ballot, physically, hand by hand by hand. And then there's always a Democrat and a Republican. Whenever they do a recount, there's always one Democrat, one Republican staring at the table counting the votes together. So there is indisputable evidence. And I did that for every state, in every closed state. Arizona also was a hand recount. And basically, if there's the way the laws generally work, in Missouri at least, and that's mostly the case elsewhere, if it's less than 0.5% difference, if it's a relatively close election, the losing party can ask for a recount, a hand recount. That was actually sort of the issue in Florida in 2000. Al Gore asked for a hand recount of every ballot in Florida, and the Supreme Court ruled that no, you can't do that. You can't actually have a hand recount of every ballot because there is no right to vote for president, so it doesn't matter. Crazy ruling, one of the most just bizarre rulings ever in the Supreme Court history. Of course, we just had we may be putting that for a run on its money with this ruling on the Texas case, but that's neither here nor there. So, real problem with electronic voting. So we don't, even though it's convenient as all get out, I can sit in my jammies and vote on my phone, you don't want that because you gotta have paper trail. You've gotta have paper trail. So that's one thing you don't want to do. And you've gotta have some restrictions, registration deadlines. Missouri, now some states do it the last minute. I think that's so hard to do. Missouri it's about a month in advance essentially. Gives people time to get the voting registration rolls up to date. So if you moved, you've got to register about a month in advance, so give them time to do that. Now you could move it earlier. I know there's some states, I'm going to say Minnesota does same-day registration, which is exciting, but it could cause some headaches. Vote by mail. Now Trump was a huge critic of vote by mail, and I am to a certain extent as well, but not for the reason Republicans are. What was the Republican reason for vote by mail? What was their criticism of that? Ballot harvesting, Chinese ballot stuffing with bamboo, all kinds of stuff were being sent in. That is completely false. Okay. The reason why we know that is because when you vote by mail, you're a registered voter, and you vote, and you have signature matching, so you have to send in the signature. Now, sometimes what happened is some states there was a controversy because I think it was California, but I could be wrong on that. I believe California sent an absentee ballot to every single eligible voter in California. And a lot of people don't vote. And so there was missing ballots. Well, some of you didn't vote. Raise your hand. If you didn't vote, you wouldn't mail in your ballot. You'd be a missing ballot. Well, you just didn't decide not to vote. So this whole missing ballot is just only because people decided not to vote. But my issue with vote by mail is a lack of privacy. This is because a few years ago, a student of mine was in my class, and she was actually from Oregon, which has done vote by mail for I think a couple decades now, for a long time now, at least a decade. And she was telling me how it was really cool because her family, there were 4 people who could vote in her family, her mom, her dad, herself, and her brother, and they'd get 4 ballots in the mail. And then her dad would sit down and kind of help them all and basically fill them out for all 4 of them, and they would all sign them and then send them off. Well, what's wrong with that? Everybody, and he basically filled them out for them. Okay, so in my mind, that's the real concern with vote by mail. It's not that you're going to have, Chinese ballots with bamboo or anything like that. Is you're going to have pressure on siblings and family members and spouses to vote a way that that you may not want to. So abusive spouses, I think it was the next one. So I don't even like ballot selfies. I think we shouldn't be allowed to do. In fact, they're actually illegal in most states. Ballot selfies are, and I think for a good reason. And so what's the mean? Because if you got an abusive spouse, or I'll give you $100 if you vote for Joe Biden. And you vote for Joe Biden, take a ballot selfie of you voting for Joe Biden, you get $100. Otherwise, if you don't do that, in our current system where you show up, secret ballot, how do you prove that you voted for Joe Biden? You can't. So you could say, oh, sure, give me $100, I'll vote for Joe Biden, then vote any way you want. Oh, yeah, give me $100, I voted. How would they know, right? I really am worried about vote by mail, not for the fraud that we're talking about, what Trump is talking about, but because that there's a possibility of a loss of privacy when you vote. I think it's really important to vote. Now there are ways around that. I think people can actually, like in Oregon, if you actually send it in by mail, you can actually go in and vote in person and say, scratch my vote at my mail-in ballot. So you can do things like that to override your mail-in ballot. But that's really my concern. But the fraud that we're talking about, that Donald Trump and the Republican Party is talking about, simply does not exist.
Folks still believe the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen thanks to conservative news outlets like OAN. But now OAN faces a $1 billion lawsuit that alleges OAN knowingly reported defamatory claims against Dominion voting systems, including one by, quote, expert mathematician named Ed Solomon. Here's Mr. Solomon.
You can use the binomial probability formula, and the chance of that event happening is 1/10 to an exponent so large there's not enough stars in the universe. So there's not enough atoms in the universe to explain the number.
Wow, binomial probability. Stars in the universe, that all sounds pretty impressive. Until you crunch the binomials on that guy and find out Solomon's not actually a mathematician. He's some dude with no college degree who installs swing sets.
So you're seeing a lot of networks. One American News, I think it's OAN stands for. I think it's right. Just making up crap. Oh, this is impossible for it to happen this way. These are, they're put on the air as people who are experts, and they have no degree in mathematics. They're not experts at all, and so you have people now. One of the ballot companies that actually produce the ballot software and the ballots for several states are now suing OAN and I believe Fox News as well as Giuliani and others for over $1.3 billion because of these fraudulent claims. Unfortunately, they're still getting airtime. By the way, there was a lot of anger at Georgia because Georgia went for Biden by. Let me see if I have the numbers. I thought I had the numbers somewhere. I thought I put the numbers up there somewhere. I want to say about 12,000 votes. Anyone know who the Secretary of State, which party the Secretary of State, Rathlisberger, I think his name was? What party he belonged to? He was a Republican. So these are, and Arizona is the same way. You had Republican officials saying this election was not stolen. It was free and fair. They ran the elections. They said it was free and fair. Kurt Barr, I hope you all can come tomorrow at 1. Actually, there's lots of things tomorrow. We got an 11:30 spiel on Moms Demand Action, talking about lots of good stuff. Democracy Days is all week. Talking about advocacy and how to advocate for change. And at 1 o'clock, we're going to have Kurt Barr, the Director of Elections for St. Charles County, talking about how elections work and why this whole notion of fraud just is impractical, just doesn't happen. So, you know, people like Kurt Barr and other elected Republican officials actually had the spine to stand up to Donald Trump and say, no, this was not stolen. Unfortunately, for a lot of those people, they were getting death threats. And now Donald Trump has posted challenges in the primaries to those people for those offices. But at least in 2000, a lot of Republicans stood up and said, no, this is false. This is a lie.
According to a QAnon theory, the UV light will reveal watermarks that Donald Trump put on the ballots to trap cheating Democrats.
Another bizarre twist that I was just telling you about moments ago in the Arizona audit. Auditors are now looking for bamboo in ballots.
Audit official John Brakey says there are accusations that 40,000 ballots were smuggled in from Asia. While there's no evidence of this, Brakey says auditors are using cameras now to look for bamboo fibers in ballot paper.
So, no, that's crazy. And I really resent the fact that the media is calling it an audit. An audit implies rigorous standards. If you ever do an audit, if you come here tomorrow at 1 o'clock and hear Kurt Barr talk about what an audit is, a ballot audit, it's a real thing. That's not a ballot audit, what they're doing in Arizona. That's a hoax. Okay, that is Trump-appointed people hiring Trump officials. They had pens. They brought in pens the same color that people use to mark the ballots. So if you're doing an audit, the one thing you don't want to do is have pens that you mark the ballot in the place where you're counting the ballots, right? Because what can you do if you have a pen the same color as you mark the ballots? Exactly. I mean, it's just the Arizona audit is just incredibly unethical. And so, and the bamboo thing, it just kills me. Just absolutely bizarre. But again, there are a few cases of mail-in ballot fraud. I think it was Pennsylvania. I know there are 2 cases in Pennsylvania that I know of. They were both caught. Both, by the way, were Republicans voting for dead relatives. That their mother had died recently. One of them guy was a mother died a few weeks ago, and he requested an absentee ballot in her name, even though she was dead. Filled it out and mailed it in, because Pennsylvania was one of those close swing states. Sadly, he got 0 prison time. 0 prison time. He confessed to trying to illegally vote in the presidential election, to fraudulently asking for an absentee ballot for his dead mother, fraudulently voting for Donald Trump using her dead mother, and he got 0 jail time. Now contrast that to the woman I talked about earlier, who legally thought she had the right to vote because she was on parole. She was wrong, didn't even cast a provisional ballot, and got 5 years in prison for it. I mean, there's a difference. I mean, to me, it's shocking. But there are occasional people that do this, but again, Pennsylvania was not even close. It was not even close. One of my favorite ones was the ghost of Hugo Chavez. Apparently, they thought Hugo Chavez was, I don't remember exactly how he did this, whether his spirit imbued the machines or whatever, but he rigged the voting machines in various states, the Dominion voting machines, and therefore switched some votes. Again, if you use paper, which they all did Does it matter if Hugo Chavez, the ghost of Hugo Chavez, came back from the dead and rigged the tally count on the machine? Does it matter? Why not? What?
They're actually correct. Yeah, I don't know. It's like, there's clear evidence.
You have hand recount. You have the hand recount. And so it just, you know, the Italian lasers changing the machines and the ghost of Hugo Chavez changing the machines. Now, I guess you could argue the Chinese fake ballots, I guess those are real ballots. I guess you could argue that's a real thing. But you would have to actually do that. You'd actually have to know how people voted, you know, where the addresses were, and you'd have to bring those ballots to the United States and mail them from their districts, from their state, so they, you know, from the United States. Because I guarantee you, if you're a electoral worker, a poll worker, and you get a bunch of ballots from China that are postmarked from China, they're probably going to be suspicious of that, right? So you have to bring those ballots to the United States and mail them to the United States. You have to know who's voting. You know, it would be an incredible operation to be able to pull that one off. And again, in enough states for it to make a difference. And in which case, it would have been at least 3 states to flip. Unlikely. So these guys are just these allegations are just bizarre, absolutely bizarre. But what's shocking to me. And I was going back and forth, and I kept on looking up what's the latest poll data. 66% of Republicans actually believe the big lie the election was stolen. 66% of Republicans. To me, that is just shocking that many people believe this lie. Again, no evidence. You had this one mathematician, turns out to be, again, swing sets are awesome. I'm glad he builds swing sets. They're very cool. But it does not qualify him as a mathematician talking about electoral votes. Okay. But it's just really shocking to me. Maybe I didn't do that one yet.
Dell's own team has announced that they can't prove his claims that China hacked the election. When asked why they can't prove it, they said, "We were handed a turd."
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not a computer guy. I don't know what most of this stuff means, but I've been researching this election since November 3rd. But the CNNs of the world, you guys need to start reporting this and stop fact-checking it.
Yes. Listen, stop fact-checking, CNN.
So, yes. Yeah, just report what we say and stop actually bothering to fact-check whether it's true or not. So, what are my conclusions? Well, we need election security, which we have. Okay, we have election security. It's actually work, and again, the real audit, I don't mean the fake audit you're doing in Arizona, I mean the real ballot audit is awesome. In fact, I was talking with Kurt Barr, gosh, I don't know, when was it, last time we were talking, and what they do is they go over and they do actually do a random audit. They go through and they make sure the votes randomly. They go to various precincts and they make sure you get so many votes for Biden and so many votes for Trump. And they physically go through them and make sure those are the same numbers. The machine reading them is the same number. Okay, and I would love it if we did more of those. And that's a real audit. Again, by an audit, I mean a Democrat and a Republican sitting in the same room going over those ballots to make sure there's no shenanigans going on. That we have. So we need election security. So I don't think anyone is saying we should, hopefully no one is anymore saying we should do vote from home and all that kind of vote on your iPad or on your iPhone. I think it's a terrible idea. The claims of voter fraud are completely unfounded, absolutely unfounded. Again, Kurt Barr tomorrow will talk about election security and how the process works in St. Charles County. It's very similar. And again, kudos to St. Charles County. I vote in St. Charles County. And I think St. Louis County probably does something very similar. It's a Scantron. I don't know if you know, it's probably been a while since some of you have been in college, but remember those Scantrons? You fill in bubbles and you run through the machine. What's good about Scantrons? Again, what are we talking about? What can you do with the Scantron if you're not sure the machine is accurate? What can you do? You can check Charles County. You fill out your bubble, and the other benefit of those Scantron sheets is if there's a power outage. Okay, because some states have all electronic voting, where there's no ballot, there's no paper ballot, or it's just it's very hard to count the paper ballots if there is one. They're moving away from that, thank God, because that's a terrible idea. Because if there's a power outage, how do you vote? You can't. But on the little Scantron things, you can vote all day. Just a few flashlights, and you can keep voting. The line can keep moving, and then at the end of the day, you can run the Scantron machine, or go to another place, plug it in, and run the Scantron machine there when there is power. So all kinds of benefits we do make sure there's no voter fraud. Another important conclusion, as I said before, political scientists care about the how the rules of the game affecting the outcome, and basically what you saw, if you came here early, I showed you some clips where Republicans were saying what? What were Republicans saying? What was the reason for photo ID? If you saw at the very beginning. But what did they actually say when they were interviewed about it? What was the comment in meetings? In Pennsylvania, the one guy in Pennsylvania, he was the head of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania. What did he say it was really about? Exactly. He bragged that, hey, look, Obama won Pennsylvania by 10 percentage points in 2008. But after we had photo ID, he only won it by 5. That's because of photo ID. So that's what's really going on. Photo ID is not about election security. It's done to make it harder for Democrats to vote, because Democrats tend to have less photo IDs. Now, Texas, for example, passed a photo ID law, and anyone have had American politics? How do young people tend to vote? If you're 18 to 20, something like that, which party do you tend to vote for? Democrat, okay. So if you have especially college students, right? College students not significantly vote Democrat. So, do a lot of public universities give out photo IDs? Yeah, basically all the public universities. So Texas passed a law, photo ID law, where it says your state-issued, University of Texas, Austin, photo ID does not count as a photo ID. Will not count. But your state-issued hunting license will count to vote. Now, we just agreed that if you're a young college student, you're probably leaning Democrat. How about hunters? Probably leaning Republican. So do you think it was a coincidence that the University of Texas Republican legislature passed a law saying you had to have proof of photo ID, your hunting license counts, but your student ID, state-issued student ID, does not? Of course not. There was no logical reason for that. So just 2 weeks ago, Texas passed a law which banned 24-hour in-person voting. You could vote in person, show your ID, and vote for 24 hours a day. So if you get off the late shift, if you get off at 10 o'clock at night, you can go vote towards the end. Why would you ban that? You still have to show your photo ID. You still have to go to the polling place. Why would you ban? Or poor people who tend to, working class people who tend to be more democratic. So yeah, they made it so that, especially in urban areas like, I think it was Houston that was famous for that. In Houston, they had this 24-hour voting. Again, you still had to show your ID to vote, because Texas has photo ID, but they banned that. They want to make it harder to vote, because the Republicans know if it's harder to vote, you're more likely to help Republicans. Now, the thing is, in Texas, it probably doesn't matter that much for most elections in Texas, because Texas, like Missouri, is a red state. But there are some congressional seats where it might be close, and so there are some issues there. So why does it matter? One, voting is a constitutional right. The Constitution guarantees your right to vote. And you should not infringe on that right to vote unless there's a damn good reason. And in-person voter impersonation just doesn't happen. You should not take away now. There's limits. You have to, you balance the needs, the needs of security, sometimes outweigh that. So we have to have some security protocols. I don't want you just voting on your phone because there's a security issue there. There is no security issue with mail-in ballots in general. Now, by the way, I said earlier, I'm actually in favor of mail-in ballots during a pandemic, okay? I think it's, in those cases, I think it makes a lot of sense to say, well, okay, for that election, yeah, you're just gonna have to deal with it because it's safer for society not to have people. In fact, I know in St. Charles County, I think it was the presidential election. Kuwait was it was the presidential election. We actually had an election worker in St. Charles, in one of the precincts in St. Charles, who tested positive for COVID. She sat in the booth when she got your ballots from.
I heard about it.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And what did she do?
Did she not say anything?
She didn't say anything. She showed up and handed everyone a ballot on election day. Even though she had tested positive for COVID, she still showed up and gave out ballots on election day. Okay, it's like, yeah, during a pandemic, mail-in ballots make sense. But in general, I'm not a big fan of mail-in ballots. But I mean, I think, not that there are some times where you need to do it. Why else does it matter? Well, because people believe this crap. I mean, shockingly, people believe it. The January 6th attack on our Congress was a direct result because people thought Joe Biden stole the election. Whether it was the ghost of Hugo Chavez, bamboo, or Chinese bamboo, or Italian military satellites switching ballots, all the crazy conspiracy, people believe it. And to this day, 48% of Republicans think that the January 6th insurrection was not even Trump supporters. They were actually Antifa, pretending to be Trump supporters, trying to overturn the election to help Trump become president. I'm not sure why Antifa would try to help Trump become president, but that was, they literally believe that. And it's dangerous. We don't want to undermine democracy, so that's a real concern there. And George W. Bush, who I'm not a big fan of, I think the war in Iraq was perhaps one of the worst foreign policy mistakes in U.S. history. But he summed up very nicely on September 11th, just a few days ago.
And we have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdain for pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit, and it is our continuing duty to confront them.
So I thought it was very powerful of former President Bush to speak out against those January 6th protesters and those who continue to support them. They are a threat to our democracy. And what really disturbs me is you're seeing, like Roethlisberger, that brave Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, has been harangued by Donald Trump. Donald Trump is promoting people to oust him in the primaries in an attempt to get someone who next time around will not stand up to Donald Trump. So that's what you're seeing now. What happened in 2020, our system worked. The Republicans in charge of these elections stopped the steal, literally stopped the steal from Donald Trump. The problem is, a lot of these people that stopped him, Roethlisberger in Georgia, he voted for Trump. He gave money to Donald Trump. But he said, no, it was a free and fair election. I'm sorry you lost, Trump. I wanted you to win, but you lost fair and square. Trump is trying to drive him out of office and replacing him. He's the guy who runs elections in Georgia, replacing him with somebody who will not stand up to Donald Trump, who will spread the big lie. So that's what's scary, is 2020 worked because Republicans stood up and said, no, Trump, you're lying. There was no steal. It was a free and fair election. But those Republicans that stood up are being driven out of the party. Look what happened to Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney. Who's Liz Cheney besides being vice president, former vice president Cheney's daughter? She used to be, how powerful did she used to be? Anyone know? She was the third most powerful member of the House. No longer. She's kicked out of leadership. Why? She said no. The election wasn't, she dared to say the election was not stolen. She dared to contradict Donald Trump. Said no, the election was not stolen. And because she stood up to Donald Trump, the Republican House voted her out. Even though she is right-wing Republican. She is super right-wing Republican. But she dared to say, she has some ethics, and she dared to say, no, Trump was lying, and the Republicans booted her out. And so this is what I'm worried for, is not necessarily, because 2020 worked. Republicans stood up to Donald Trump and said, no, that's a lie. But I'm worried that they're purging, the Republican Party is purging all those people who dared to stand up to Donald Trump and replacing them with yes men who will not stand up to him if it happens again. So I do worry about that. Again, because it's a state-by-state election. If you have another election in 2024 that is really close, and odds are there will be states that are close. Not Missouri, not Illinois, not New York, not Texas, not California, but there will be states that are close. And you could have some real pressure. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. You could have some real pressure on Republican politicians just to back the lie up. So that's what I'm really worried about. It worked this time around, but I'm scared for next time. Any comments, questions? Yes?
So what kind of registration is needed to be able to vote? So if you don't have an ID, like what?
Oh, in Missouri?
Well, I guess in Missouri, but also like in general, like what do you need?
So in Missouri, to register to vote, you typically need, actually you can do it when you get, do you have a driver's license? When you probably already registered to vote. Did you get your driver's license? Maybe it was after 18? And then you're registered to vote. Now, there's a fight, but if you're not sure, shoot, I didn't bring my, there actually is the Secretary of State of Missouri has a web page, and I wonder if I can, if you email me, I'll give you the link, and you can actually check your voter registration status, and if you're not registered, you can actually vote, you could register to vote online. You can't vote online, but you could register to vote online. I believe, to do it online, and if you don't want to do that, our library, any public library, or our library, where are we? Our library is that way. Our library that way. There are people that you can register to vote. Just walk by. Anytime you walk by the library, just fill out the registration card, mail it in, and you're registered to vote. So. I've heard that too, and that's why, especially about the 2016 election, there were millions of illegal immigrants voting. But he actually had a panel, and I actually had a clip on that too, but it was just already getting long enough, so I didn't hear. He actually had a panel to look at illegal voting in 2016, and they met like 4 or 5 times. They had zero evidence of that, and so they just kind of melted away. So there was no, so Trump was president. So he actually picked a panel to look into this, and they couldn't find any evidence of this. Now, again, are there a few examples where people illegally vote? Sure, I told you about a couple in Pennsylvania. So I'm not saying there's never anyone who illegally tries to vote, but it just doesn't happen on a scale large enough to impact. And I'm really disappointed. I don't know why these guys in Pennsylvania got off with, I don't know whether the prosecutor was a Republican and he didn't want to prosecute another fellow Republican for voting Trump, but I'm sorry, that is no prison sentence for deliberately illegally voting is wrong. You should, if you deliberately, knowingly, illegally vote, like he sent in for his mother was dead, he sent in for, to me, that's just not an accident. That's like, oh, I didn't realize it. He deliberately did that. You should get some prison time for that. Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to me that, and she didn't even count the ballot because it was a provisional, because she was taken off the rolls, so she voted provisionally, and so actually she's now suing, and they're appealing it because they said she never actually voted. Because, so we'll see if it's going all the way to the Supreme Court, but that's her argument, is that, look, it's illegal to vote, but I didn't actually vote because they never counted my ballot, therefore I didn't vote. So we'll see if that flies. But it's just outrageous to me that someone who, you screw up. I mean, people make a mistake all the time. The other issue that does happen, rich people especially, they have multiple houses in multiple states. And actually some Trump members, some members of the Trump family are actually registered to vote in multiple states. Now, I don't know if they voted in multiple states, but they're registered to vote in multiple states. You can't do that. You live in one state and one state only. So I don't know, again, I don't know if they actually voted or not in both states, but I do know they're registered to vote. At least they were a few years ago. But I know it frequently happens. That was a fairly common thing in Florida. People who had multiple houses would vote in Florida, and it's like, no, you can't, unless you live in Florida, you can't do that. So that is an occasional issue, but it's relatively small. Again, I don't remember the exact percentage, but I think Trump won Florida by like 3%, which was, probably a couple 100,000 votes. So a handful of people doing that is not going to matter in Florida, but that's the one problem, the one drawback of doing state by state is that those states that are close, you want to make sure that there's not fraud there. But any other questions? Yes, please.
What's the federal HR1 or something? The Republicans are pushing in the House.
Democrats. HR1, the Democrats are pushing.
What's in that bill? I don't know the details.
I didn't hear the whole story. I heard a story this morning and they mentioned one thing, but it may be others too. Because the problem is, his question was about HR1, which is the Democrats want to make it to promote voting. And so you have a liberal wish list. What probably can get passed is very different. Because you've got in the Senate, you've got like Joe Manchin, you've got a couple others, Kristen Sinema, who are they're Democrats, but they're very conservative Democrats. So you've got Democrats have 50 votes in the Senate, which is a 50-50 tie. So how come Democrats control the Senate if it's a 50-50 tie? Oh, Kamala Harris is vice president, she breaks a tie. So technically Democrats control the Senate, but barely. So they cannot lose either of these two very conservative, Manchin or Sinema. And so they've kind of put they've kind of said, no, that's not going to happen. But one thing that might happen, and I'm hoping it does, because one of the things that I didn't put on my lecture, we actually make it kind of hard to vote in this country. When is Election Day? It's not, or it was last time, but when is Election Day in general? The first Tuesday after a Monday in November. So I think in 16, I believe it was November 8th because it was I think it was. And Tuesday is a good day because no one works on a Tuesday. There's no schools, no classes. It's a pretty laid back day, right? Nothing happens on a Tuesday. What's today? What's today anyway? I think it's a Tuesday, right? So, okay, right. So one of the things, and it's not a big deal for most of us, especially people like me who are relatively upper middle class or middle class who I can work my schedule, professional class, I can work my schedule around there. But if you're working 2 jobs, you don't have all kinds of time. So one of the things that might actually get passed, and I'm excited about, is what would you do to make voting easier? What if it had to do with a Tuesday? Say again? Oh, okay. And how do you do that? Make it a national holiday. So that's I heard, and I just heard this morning a story on that, and that's one of the things that they're hoping to get, that Joe Manchin will go along with, making Election Day, at least the federal Election Day, a national holiday. So most employers will be off. Most schools will be closed. Now, my kids' school are closed anyway because they're often polling places anyway. But that would be really exciting if that would be a national holiday. Now, would some would nurses still have to work? Would, Walgreens still have, yeah. So there are some people that would still have to be at, at SOL and still have to work, but it would make it easier for most people to work. So that's kind of one thing. But there were other things too. Anyone else remember what was in that bill? Michael, do you remember what was in that bill, HR 1? I can't remember. Do you remember? Oh, okay, you cheated. Okay.
Yeah, I did cheat. Some of the things that they're kind of presenting is like campaign finances and keeping.
That ain't gonna happen.
Yeah.
Pass.
Something they're presenting. They're also requiring like.
Is that publicly financing campaign?
Yeah, that ain't gonna happen. Supreme Court's gonna strike that puppy down.
They're pushing for like expanding voter registration for automatic and same-day registration, voting access. So early voting.
Perhaps, I think maybe early voting. I think that's one thing. And that's one thing I'm a really big fan of. That's one thing I wish we would do. Because again, as I said earlier, I love voting early. I went there on my own time. You have like, I think a month before Election Day. You could go to St. Charles. You have to go to one building in St. Charles. You drive there Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, any day of the week that's good for you for the whole month. Show up, vote early, 15-minute line. Someone, Angela had to wait an hour, she said. But 15 minutes, no big deal. No stress. You don't have to wait in a long line. Now, especially in poor areas, especially in urban areas, you've actually had lines. You have to 3 to 4 hours to wait in line. 3 to 4 hours to wait in line. That discourages. You have to be really committed to wait 4 hours in line to vote. Okay, especially if it's raining or miserable weather. So this way you could do that. But the problem with St. Charles is with early voting, you have to say you're going to be out of town. And I actually thought I was going to be out of town. Turns out we decided not to go out of town because we were kind of worried what the hell was going to happen with the elections. So we said, let's not travel on Election Day. So we decided against it. But we were planning on, so I was able to vote early, but only because I was going to be out of town. But one of the things it would do was make early voting possible. Called no excuse absent early voting, which means I could vote early for no reason. And I'm okay with same-day registration. I just think it puts a lot of work on people who have to do all that, the secretaries of state, to try to get those. And so it's a lot of work, and it's just kind of hard on them. And so I understand the benefit of it, but I like it, okay, but not a big deal for me. But yeah, so thank you. But the campaign finance reform, it ain't going anywhere. The Supreme Court has struck down so many times. Democrats have tried to pass campaign finance reform numerous times. Those who in my American government class, you ever have that, we talk a lot about the Supreme Court striking it down over and over and over again. So I don't hold your breath on that one. Good, any other questions? How much time do we have? We've got a few minutes left. Okay, well, great. Oh.
I'm just curious, I don't know if you can answer this question. How many of you intend to vote? If you haven't voted, how many of you intend to vote?
Okay, I want to vote in 2022.
I'm concerned about you young people voting. Well, whether you vote like I do or not is irrelevant. I think you should vote, know your candidates.
Well, that's a problem with knowing your candidates. Is one of the problems when I talk about it, pushing my American government class. One of the problems with the way we do elections is that party doesn't mean as much as it does if you don't have party loyalty the way, and we do have that to a certain extent. But like, for example, Manchin and Sinema don't always toe the party line. But so you can't just assume Democrat means X, Republican means Y. You can't assume that. In a lot of other countries, you don't have to know who the people are. If you know if you know they're a Green Party, if you know they're a Social Democratic Party, if you know they're the Christian Democrats, you know what they're going to do. Here's their platform. But because we don't have the strong parties that they have in most other places in the world, we can't do that. And so you have to know there's so many things on the ballot. You said how many voted last time around? Okay, this one wasn't too bad. In 2018 and 2016, the presidential ballot was like 2 pages long. There were so many things you had to vote on. And there's all, you have to vote on your state, you have to vote on the president, your governor, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of state, your U.S. congressman, your U.S. senator, your state rep, a judge appeal, or your school district's on a different ballot. But there's so many issues. It's overwhelming how many issues are on the ballot. So one little hint: you don't have to vote for anybody. You could go in there. If you just want to vote for Donald Trump for president, and in 2024, you just vote Donald Trump, and then you're done. If you don't know any, now you can vote for other people, but if you can, or you can skip something. I don't know about this race. Skip it. You don't have to vote for anybody. You can skip issues. So if don't feel like if you don't know, because I think the ballot is often intimidating. It's long, it's scary, and I think a lot of people get turned off. And so I'm not going to vote because I just don't know all these people. Don't worry about it. There's a ballot initiative. The language is confusing. Hell, I'm confused. Someone said, "What the hell does this ballot initiative do?" I wasn't even sure, so I left it blank. If I'm not sure what it does, or sometimes I vote no just because I was like, if I don't know what it means, I'm voting no, basically. But you don't have to do anything. You can leave it blank. So don't feel it's overwhelming because there are so many candidates. But if you just want to vote for president and Congress and governor, be done. That's good. You're good to go. Yes?
Mm-hmm. I think you can literally look it up and who should I vote for? What are those ballots? They'll bring up your actual state and stuff, and it'll give you a questionnaire that you fill out, and then it'll give you the candidates that follow your views and your views align with the best. That way you're making an educated vote.
Yeah, and she was saying that there are websites that help you kind of determine which candidate kind of aligns with your votes more. That's usually done for more national candidates. Congressional elections, maybe presidential or governor, something like that. It doesn't usually help you with state legislative races.
The one that I use, it actually does.
Oh, does it?
So you fill out your state, you put.
Okay.
It's on the government website.
Okay.
You click your state. So I clicked Missouri just to see who is up for in my county and everything, in St. Charles County.
Yeah.
And then it actually gave me, okay, this is who's available on your ballot. This is who you want to align with better. This person's actually with your views and everything. And so I was actually able to go in and know what I was voting for.
Okay. Yeah. And there are a lot of tools, and I don't know if you're supposed to do that, but I've now sometimes bring in my phone when I vote, and I look up. It's oh shoot, what was this? What was this candidate about? And I kind of sneak in there and I kind of look and what was I doing? And just because there's so many offices, so many races to choose from, it gets overwhelming. So, so there are things you can help you with, but if you just want to vote for president, governor, senator, congressman, you get those big four. The rest, are less important. Not that they're not important. Your state legislature is very important, but don't be overwhelmed and not vote. It's oh my God, it's too many things. I'm not going to vote. And party does help. So one thing that's helpful with the party, it does give you an idea. Democrats tend to do this. Republicans tend to do that. So there is some help. Party does help you. So if you tend to vote Republican, you can probably be safe bet putting Republican all the way down. Probably, if you like the ideas of the Republican Party. Generally speaking, and the same thing with the Democratic Party. Yes?
Did you know that HR 1 wants to make Washington, D.C. a state?
Oh, I didn't realize. I knew they were trying to make it a state, but I knew I didn't realize that was part of HR 1. I didn't know that was part of it. So what he's saying, in case you didn't hear, HR 1 is the House Bill 1, House Resolution 1, the Democrats are proposing, would do a lot of stuff. And I didn't realize that was part of it. But one of the things Democrats want to do is declare Washington, D.C. a state. And the reason why they want to do that is because while in presidential elections, the Washington, D.C. does count. They get 3 electoral votes. They have no representation in Congress. So if you live in the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., you can elect a rep. They actually do have a representative. I think her name is Eleanor Holmes Norton. At least it used to be. I assume she still is. She's still there. She has no voting power. She's just a visitor. She can watch the election, but she can't. So if you live in America, in the capital of this country, your rep has no right to vote in Congress. You have no senator, you have no representative. It's the only people in the continental United States that have no voice in Congress. and the people living in the capital of the United States. So that's one, which I think is crazy. It's like, what? So I think it's absolutely nuts. Stephen Colbert did a hilarious interview. If you like Stephen Colbert, he did a hilarious interview back when he was on the Daily Show, back when he was on Comedy Central. And he was arguing that since the District of Columbia is not a state and we're the United States, technically the District of Columbia is not actually part of the United States because it's not a state. So he was making fun of her and teasing her a little bit about that. So therefore she shouldn't be allowed to vote because she's not part of the United States because she grew up in District of Columbia. Anyway, but it's just, to me, it's outrageous. I did not realize, thank you, I didn't realize that was part of HR 1 though. And they're saying they want them like Puerto Rico, a chance to vote to get an elector or two for the presidential election. Because again, right now, if you're Puerto Rico, if you live in Puerto Rico, you don't get to vote for president. But you're an American citizen. So if you move from Puerto Rico to Florida a month before the election, you can vote there in Florida. But you can't vote, if you move back to Puerto Rico, you can't vote in Puerto Rico. But if you lived in Florida, you're the same person. If you move 1 month too early, then you can't vote in the president. So I'm guessing that's what they're doing because they're citizens, but they're not allowed to vote. So I'm not sure how Puerto Rico would vote. DC would definitely vote Democratic, but their vote already counts in the presidential election. They already have 3 electoral votes. Yes?
I guess my question is, what does it mean to be a U.S. territory? Is there a big distinction?
So what does it mean to be a U.S. territory? U.S. territory is controlled by the U.S. I went to Puerto Rico a few years ago. Lovely place. If you ever get a chance, it's a great time to go in spring break. And they use the U.S. dollar. You don't need a passport. It's part of the United States. Yes, they're government. It's a United States territory. It's ruled by the United States, but they have their own governor. They're kind of like a state, but they don't have the same power as a state, and they can't vote in presidential elections, and they can't do certain things like that. They don't have any representation in Congress, but they are kind of like a state. So yeah, and Guam, I'm assuming is the same, but I really don't know much about Guam, but I'm assuming it's the same kind of scenario as Puerto Rico. Yes?
Puerto Rico also has less, I don't know what the term would be, like power over, like in terms of like, one example I thought I heard was if you go down to Puerto Rico over speed, you can't get a fine, but they can't take points off your license if you have a mainland license or something like that. Does that mean that they have, that's true?
I don't know. So if they can't. So if you break the law in Puerto Rico, they can't come after you in the United States. I don't know. I don't know. I've not tried that. We did drive. I did have a rental car in Puerto Rico, and I don't think I broke any laws. But they haven't come after me if I did. So, but I'm not sure that's true because when I went to Italy and I drove in Italy, and I got a fine when I was in Italy, and they found me in the United States, and they sent me a bill. They sent me a. Oh, that's probably true. Yeah. So, but yeah, I don't know. It could be because it's weird things that are not a state. But yeah, Puerto Rico's not a state. So it was interesting. I'm glad he brought that up, that HR 1. So I don't think, back to HR 1, I don't think all that's going to pass. But the one thing I did hear NPR talk about this morning was that making it a federal holiday. There was working on some compromise, which I think would be awesome. I'm not sure what else is going to come through, but that would be one thing that I think that everyone could get around, support is make it a national holiday. Make voting a little easier because it's not the most convenient thing in the world. Maybe even early voting required. And the problem is states control voting, but the federal government can put some regulations on federal elections. So during congressional and presidential elections, the federal government can put some restrictions on states. But generally speaking, states have their own voting rules. I think we're about out of time. Anything else? Want to jump in real quick and say something? Okay. Thanks, guys, for coming. Have a great, there's tons of great events the next couple days. Please don't, the last 2 days, and we're ending up, the very last event is Missouri is a Thursday night panel, so please don't forget to come to that. On Thursday at 11:30, I think it's Thursday at 11:30, we're having a fantastic panel on the COVID and the Delta variant. We're having the county health department, the assistant director of the county health department come and talk about COVID in St. Charles County. So again, just tons. If you haven't got one of these, snag some. tons of good events here, and most professors will give extra credit for these things. Have a good one.
I had a question.
Sure.